Alright, so we are to the last presentation in terms of dividing decimals. The last thing that we would need to talk about is dividing by a decimal. So far, we have only been dividing by whole numbers. And when it comes to dividing by decimals, we are going to convert into dividing by a whole number. So let's talk about our procedure. Before we begin our division, we're going to move the decimal points in both numbers so that your second number or your bottom number is a whole number. Your outside number has to be a whole number. From there, we're going to use the techniques that we looked at in the previous sections or in the previous presentations in order to divide by the whole number. Alright, so let's start with some exact answers. We have 1.04 divided by 0.2 as our first example. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to move my decimal points so that this number is a whole number. So in order to move my decimal point to make it a whole number, I want to move it one place to the right. And just like we saw when we worked with fractions, whatever we do to one, we have to do to the other. So I'm going to move my decimal point one place to the right in both numbers. So now we have our problem set up so that we can divide. My first number is going to go inside, and now it is going to be 10.4. My 2 goes outside. Alright, so we divide. 2 goes into 10 5 times. 5 times 2 is 10. Subtract, we get 0. We bring down the 4. 2 goes into 4 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. Subtract, we get 0, and we are done. Finally, we want to move our decimal point up into our answer, and so our final answer is going to be 5.2. All right, let's look at another one. Let's look at 1.8072 divided by 0.06. First step, I want to move my decimal point so that I am dividing by a whole number. I'm going to move it 2 places to the right. So I'm going to do the same thing in my other number. We go ahead and put these numbers in our division problem. So now it's not going to be 1.8072, but it's going to be 180.72. And we're going to divide by 6. All right, first number that I can divide by 6 is 18. 6 goes into 18 3 times. 3 times 6 is 18. Subtract, we get 0. We bring down the 0. 6 goes into 0 times. We don't necessarily need to multiply since it is a 0, so I'm just going to bring down my next digit, which is a 7. 6 goes into 7 one time. 1 times 6 is 6. Subtract, we get 1. And we bring down a 2. 6 goes into 12 2 times. 2 times 6 is 12. Subtract, we get 0. And we're done. All right, we move our decimal point up into our answer, and so our final answer is 30.12. All right, so those are some exact answers. Let's look at a couple more. Now, for these ones, one of the things that we should note is that our second number has more decimal places than our first number. And so we do need to be careful when we do this. All right, so we're still going to do the same thing. I still want to move my decimal point. How many places on this one? We're going to go 1, 2, 3. Now 32 does not have a decimal point, and it doesn't have any digits after the decimal point. So what we're going to do for this one is we are going to add zeros after the 32, and we're going to add 3 zeros. So what this boils down to is I want to divide 32,000 by 5. So we divide. 5 goes into 32 6 times. 6 times 5 is 30. Subtract, we get 2. I bring down my 0. 5 goes into 20 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract, we get zeros. Now, as I only have zeros left over, you don't necessarily have to bring these down and divide. What we can do is, just like with our decimal point, we can move these extra zeros straight up into our answer. And so our final answer is 6,400. All right, let's try one more like this. Let's come over to D. We have 8.1 divided by 0.025. I'm going to put in some space here so that we can go ahead and have room to move a decimal point. So how many decimal places do we need to move our decimal point? Should be a total of 3. So I'm going to do the same thing on my 8.1, and I'm going to add zeros for those extra spaces. So our division problem, what this boils down to is 8,100 divided by 25. All right, so 25 goes into 81 3 times. 3 times 25 is 75. Subtract, we get 6. We bring down a 0. 25 goes into 60 2 times. 2 times 25 is 50. Subtract, we get 10. We bring down the 0. And 25 goes into 100 4 times. 4 times 25 is 100. Subtract, we get 0. And so our final answer is 324. All right, so that takes care of those examples where we have to add zeros. Let's look at one last set. All right, the last set of examples we want to look at is ones where we are going to round our answer. So the first one, we have 7 divided by 1.3. So again, the first thing I want to do is I want to move my decimal point in the bottom number. Remember, that's the number that goes outside. That's the one we want to be a whole number. So I'm going to make my 1.3 into a 13, which means that my 7 I want to turn into a 70. So we go ahead and plug into our division house. We have 70 divided by 13. I also have that I want to round to the nearest hundredth. So I'm going to add 2 decimal places. That gets me to hundredth plus 1 more. and we go ahead and start our division. 13 goes into 70 5 times. 5 times 3 is 15, carry the 1. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 65. Is 65 smaller than 70? Yes. If we subtract, we get 5. Is 5 less than 13? Yes. And so our division is good on this one. All right, we go ahead and continue. We bring down the 0. 13 goes into 53 times. 3 times 13. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 1 is 3. Is 39 smaller than 50? Yes. If we subtract, we get 11. Is 11 smaller than our divisor, 13? Yes. So we are okay there. Okay, we bring down the 0. All right, 13 goes into 110. I believe it goes in 8 times. Let's find out. 8 times 3 is 24. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 2 is 10. Is 104 smaller than 110? Yes. When we subtract, we get 6. Is 6 smaller than 13? Yes. So we are good. All right. Last thing, we bring down our 0. How many times does 13 go into 60? I think it goes in 4 times. 4 times 3 is 12. 4 times 1 is 1. Is 4 plus 1 is 5. Is 52 smaller than 60? Yes. We subtract, we get 8. Is 8 smaller than 13? Yes. So we are good. All right, so we've finished with our division. We move our decimal point straight up into our answer. And now we round. So we're going to look at the 4. The 4 tells me to round up or down. Since 4 is smaller than 5, we're going to round down, and so we end up with 5 point. Try this again. 5.38. And there is our answer for this one. All right. Last one. Let's try 5.3091 divided by negative 6.2. So first thing, we're going to move our decimal point one place to the right so that we have 62 outside. We're going to move it 1 to the right so that we end up with 53.091. This is in the thousandths, but remember we want one more digit to determine whether it rounds up or down. Okay, so let's see what we can do here. 62 goes into, it does not go into 53, it does go into 530. And I think it goes in 8 times. Let's try it. We get 8 times 2 is 16. Carry the 1. 8 times 6 is 48, plus 1 is 49. We subtract. I'm going to come off to the side because these subtractions are getting a little crazy. We get 530 minus 496. I'm going to borrow from the 3, make it a 2, and I'm going to make my 0 a 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. We have to borrow from the 5, make the 2 into a 12, sorry, we're borrowing from the 5, it becomes a 4. And we get 12 minus 9 is 3, so we get a remainder of 34. Is that smaller than 62? Yes, so we are okay. All right, we bring down the 9. Okay, we go ahead and divide 349 by 62. That's going to go in 5 times. 5 times 2 is 10. We carry the 1. 5 times 6 is 30. Plus 1 is 31. Okay, this subtraction is going to be okay here. 9 minus 0 is 9. 4 minus 1 is 3. Is that smaller than 62? Yes. So we bring down our next digit. All right, 62 goes into 391 6 times. 6 times 2 is 12. Carry the 1. 6 times 6 is 36, plus 1 is 37. Since we have to do some carrying, I'm going to come off to the side and do my subtraction. We have to borrow from the 9, it becomes an 8, and 1 becomes 11. 11 minus 2 is 9, 8 minus 7 is 1. So we get 19. That is smaller than 62, so we are good. All right, we bring down our 0. 62 goes into 190 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 6 is 12. I'm going to go ahead off to the side again and do my 190 minus 124. 9 becomes an 8. 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. 8 minus 2 is 6. And I do have a slight problem here. 66 is bigger than 62. So I did not go far enough. I need to go ahead and erase what we have here. And I should have gone with 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 6 is 18. If I subtract, I get 4. Okay, so I'm going to move my decimal point up into my answer. And I'm going to go ahead and look at my rounding. 3 tells me to round up or down. This tells me to round down. So my final answer will be 0.85. We're rounding down. We're going to leave the digit the same. Last thing we have is we are dealing with signed numbers. We are dividing a positive by a negative. And so my final answer is negative 0.856. Now, as I did some multiplication there wrong or some division wrong, I think it's time for me to take a break. So this completes this section. So you should be able to go ahead and work on the homework for D5 now.